I'm Samantha Foster, and this is Venus Mastermind, a space for honest reflection, pattern breaking, and sovereign thinking. I'm not here to perform or to teach in a formal way. This is a shared reflection, a place to think out loud, to name what's been living in me, and to speak honestly about what I'm seeing and integrating. There's no agenda here beyond truth and presence. If something here resonates, take what's yours and leave the rest. Welcome back. This episode is different from the others in this series. It doesn't have a clean outline. It isn't structured around definitions and frameworks. What you're going to hear today is something rawer than that. A lived examination. A real-time walkthrough of what it actually looks like to sit down with your own morals, define the ethics that flow from them, and then ask where your values fit into all of it. Most people have never done this. We talk about values, we talk about character, we talk about integrity, but we almost never sit with the actual roles we're living by and ask, where did this come from? Who installed it? Does it still serve the adult I am now? I did that, and it was uncomfortable. And it was clarifying. There were moments where it got hot, where I got activated and frustrated and protective. And those moments turned out to be the most useful part of the whole thing, for reasons I'll explain. So that's what I'm sharing today, not as a lecture, but as a model, because the process itself is what matters, and I want you to be able to do this for yourself. Here's the first thing I want you to understand, because it reframes everything. You did not choose your moral code. You reverse engineered it from your survival data. As a child, your nervous system was scanning constantly. What gets love? What gets punished? What gets approval? What gets withdrawal? You weren't sitting in a philosophy class deciding what mattered. You were figuring out how to stay attached, how to stay safe. If smiling kept you safe, pleasantness became moral. If speaking up caused chaos, silence became moral. If self-sacrifice earned praise, self-denial became moral. If ambition threatened someone, smallness became moral. A child doesn't think, I shall adopt this moral framework. A child thinks, what keeps me attached? And whatever the answer was, that became the code. Then culture piles on top. Religion, school, family identity, gender roles, economic class. You absorb moral language long before you develop critical reasoning. The prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for higher judgment and long-term thinking, isn't fully developed until your mid-20s. So a large portion of your moral framework was installed before you had the hardware to evaluate it. That hit me hard when I really sat with it, not as an excuse, as an explanation. And here's what I want you to hold as we go through this. Examining your morals is not the same as abandoning them. The goal is never to become morally unmoored. The goal is to know what you're actually living by and to decide as an adult whether it still makes sense. Morals that survive scrutiny becomes principles. Morals that crumble were probably fear-based from the start. So how do you find the morals running your life when most of them are operating below your awareness? You follow the emotional spikes. That's right. You don't excavate your subconscious morals by staring into the abyss. It doesn't work. You excavate them by observing the moments when you have a strong reaction and asking what rule you believe just got violated. That's what I have to do. There are 4 questions I used to do this, and I want to walk you through each one. The first, when I feel immediately moral outrage, what rule do I believe was broken? For me, things like exploitation of the vulnerable, violation of consent, people forced against their freedom of movement, that gives me outrage. And underneath it, the rule is clear. Do not exploit the vulnerable. Do not violate consent. Do not override freedom through coercion. That outrage isn't fragility. It's a functioning ethical compass. The second one, when I feel guilt, what rule do I believe I broke? Guilt shows up for me when I shame someone, when I say something that manipulates or diminishes, when my words or actions cause harm, I didn't attend, or maybe did attend in a reactive moment. Underneath it, do not weaponize what you know. Do not use insight as a weapon against someone. The third, when I feel superiority. What role do I believe I follow better than others? This one made me pause. When I noticed wasn't classic superiority, not I'm better than you. It was something more like I see patterns. I'm aware of things others haven't looked at, and that awareness creates power. The rule underneath, power is for uplift, not domination. And the ethics that follow, what do I do with what I see? I'm in this work, coaching, this podcast, because what I notice is meant to be passed forward, not held over. And the fourth rule, when I feel shame, what rule do I believe I violated? And this one cracked something open. When I sat with shame, the list didn't go where I expected. I feel shame around my finances, around not owning a home at 54, around multiple divorces, a life that didn't look the way I imagined. I'd been treating that shame like it was moral information, like it was telling me I violated something real. But when I examined it, I realized I had been turning outcomes into moral verdicts. The hidden rule I've been living under sounded like this. A good woman builds a stable, financially secure, respectable life. But when I pressure tested it by this age, does divorce violate consent? No. Often it's the opposite. Does renting violate integrity? No. Does financial struggle mean I deceived someone? No. So, why does shame attach? Because shame is triggered when identity falls short of internalized standards. And those standards were absorbed, not chosen. Stability equals safety. Marriage equals worth. Financial success equals competence. When those outcomes didn't solidify, my nervous system read it as I failed the moral test. But outcome does not equal virtue. And here's what that distinction makes possible. Instead of measuring worth against a social script I didn't author, I can measure it against something I did author. And that required going back to the beginning, back to my real morals, back to what my real morals actually are. I started with do no harm, one of the most widely cited moral principles and one of the most distorted. If do no harm means live your life so nobody ever gets hurt, that's impossible. It leads to paralysis. Never setting a boundary because someone might be upset, never telling a hard truth because someone might feel destabilized, never growing if growth creates friction. That's not ethics. That's hypervigilance with a halo on it. Harm is not the same as discomfort. Surgery causes pain. It is not harm. Ending a toxic relationship causes distress. It's not harm. Telling the truth can destabilize someone. It is not harm. For people who grew up in environments where they were trained to manage other people's emotions, that distinction is everything. Because do no harm can get weaponized into don't upset, don't challenge, don't confront, don't choose yourself if it causes friction. That's not a moral, that's emotional self-erasure dressed up as virtue. So I rebuilt it into something I can actually stand in. Do not intentionally violate consent. Do not deceive for selfish gain. Do not use power carelessly. And accept that growth will create discomfort. Notice what the last line does. It removes the martyr clause. I am not responsible for eliminating all discomfort. I am responsible for not weaponizing power. Those are different ethical universes. The second moral surfaced from something I already felt strongly but had never articulated. Once awareness and capacity are present, I am responsible for my choices. This one has still in it. It rejects victim permanence. It says, ignorance may explain behavior, but awareness removes that excuse. But awareness isn't binary, it's layered. Intellectual awareness. I understand this concept. Emotional awareness. I feel the truth of it. Embodied awareness. My nervous system can actually act differently now. A person can know something cognitively and still not have the nervous system capacity to behave differently yet. So this moral doesn't become a weapon. It doesn't say you know better, so why aren't you perfect yet? It says once awareness and capacity align, I am responsible for ongoing alignment and effort, not for immediate flawlessness, for direction. The third moral surfaced more quietly, but it runs the deepest. I commit to building a life that increases the resources, stability, freedom, and capacity available to my children beyond what I inherited. This one is generative, not restraint-based. It's about what I'm building toward, and I had to be careful with it. Because if it becomes, I must achieve financial abundance or I have failed my children, that's pressure, not purpose. But if it becomes, I commit to increasing capacity beyond what I started with, that's directional. It demands movement, not perfection. And what I had to ask honestly, have my children inherited more awareness, more emotional language, more tools for sovereignty? If yes, the arc is already bending upward, even before financial abundance fully stabilizes. Because intergenerational improvement is not only measured in net worth. Here's where this gets practical in a way I hadn't fully understood before I did this work. A moral is the anchor. Ethics are the behaviors that flow from it. And here's why that distinction matters. A vague moral distorts over time. Without specific behaviors attached, a moral can be twisted, weaponized, or quietly abandoned without you ever noticing. But a moral with behavioral ethics underneath it, specific, lived, actionable, stays stable. You know when you're in it and when you're not. Let me show you what that looks like from my own constitution. From moral number 1, do not violate consent, do not deceive for selfish gain, do not use power carelessly, accept that growth creates discomfort, 4 behavioral ethics flow directly. The first I call consent ethics. I don't coerce, pressure, or manipulate agreement. I respect another person's right to say no, and I don't override autonomy because I think I know better. The second is integrity ethics. I don't misinterpret reality for personal advantage. I don't distort information to control outcomes. When my interests are involved, I name them. The third is power ethics. I recognize when I hold positional, emotional, intellectual, or relational power, and I don't weaponize it to dominate or humiliate. I assess foreseeable impact before acting in high-leverage situations. And the fourth, and this is the one that freed me, I call growth and discomfort ethics. I allow others to experience natural consequences. I do not shrink to prevent someone else's discomfort. I know the difference between harm and emotional reaction. None of those require self-abandonment. None suppress ambition. They require awareness, not self-erasure. From moral number 2, once awareness and capacity are present, I'm responsible. 3 more ethics follow. Self-accountability. I don't hide behind ignorance once I understand impact. When I cause harm, I repair. When evidence shows misalignment, I adjust. Others' accountability. I don't excuse repeated harmful behavior after awareness is established. I allow natural consequences for conscious choices. And capacity ethics. I recognize that intellectual awareness and embodied capacity can differ. Responsibility means ongoing alignment and effort, not instant flawlessness. From moral number 3, building upward, the ethics become about modeling, not just achieving. Pursuing financial literacy and growth without compromising integrity. Modeling accountability so my children inherit patterns, not just outcomes. Interrupting inherited trauma rather than passing it forward. Prioritizing emotional safety and repair. Measuring success by upward trajectory, not by whether I look impressive to strangers. What these ethics do, all of them together, is close the gap between what I believe and how I move. Morals tell me what I won't violate. Ethics tell me how I actually show up. And here's the part that surprised me. Naming the ethics under each moral made the morals harder to distort. When someone tries to tell me that having boundaries is harmful, or that telling a hard truth is cruel, or that charging what I'm worth is greedy, I can go back to the actual ethical framework. Not a feeling, not a vague principle, a specific lived behavioral standard I authored and chose. That's the protection ethics offer. They keep morals from drifting into either rigidity or confusion. Here's where ethics get practical in a way that changed how I read my own reactions. Morals are your declared guardrails. Ethics are your behavioral code. Morals say what you won't violate. Ethics say how you behave in real situations to make sure you don't. So when outrage flares toward someone else, what's actually happening? You're witnessing behavior that violates one of your moral guardrails. But the heat comes from the ethical layer. You're seeing someone act in a way you would not allow yourself to act. If your moral is do not deceive, and someone manipulates or lies, your outrage isn't random. It's your internal regulator signaling that breaks the behavioral code. Now flip it inward. When you feel mad at yourself, disappointed in yourself, guilty, it's almost always because you violated your behavioral code, not necessarily your abstract moral, your operational ethic. You value accountability. Your ethic says, when I'm aware, I act. If you delay action after awareness, you feel friction. That friction isn't proof you're immoral. It's your integrity system signaling misalignment. So outrage toward others equals a perceived violation of your morals and ethical code. Shame or guilt towards yourself equals a perceived violation of your own ethical standard. That's why ethics feel so regulating. They are the behavioral bridge between principle and identity. But here's where it gets more nuanced and more honest. Not all outrage is clean. Sometimes the outrage is clean. Someone truly violated consent or integrity, and your system is responding accurately. But sometimes the outrage is displaced. meaning the other person is doing something you secretly give yourself permission to do, or something you've done and never fully reconciled. And sometimes that outrage is projection. You're punishing externally what you haven't dealt with internally. So the adult move isn't to ask, am I right to be outraged? It's to ask, what ethic of mine is being triggered right now? If you can name it the ethic, you regain power, because now you're not being run by the reaction, you're decoding it. And breaking your own ethic doesn't make you a bad person. It makes you human and inconsistent. The key is what happens next. Do you rationalize or do you recalibrate? That's where integrity actually forms. Integrity isn't never failing your ethic. It's noticing the gap and correcting. Now, just like values, ethics also come in two different weights, and this parallel is worth naming explicitly. There are preference level ethics, things you simply wouldn't do, not because they connect to a core moral, but because they're not who you are. Someone overshares, someone acts in a way you find it distasteful, someone makes a choice you'd never make. There's no heat, just clarity. Not my style. You observe it, note it, and move on. No surge, no urgency, just difference. And then there are identity integrated ethics, the ones anchored to a core moral. When these are violated by someone else or by yourself, the response is layered and significant, because it's not just behavior anymore. It's alignment with your internal constitution being disrupted. Moral, ethic, and character expressions all point at the same thing. And when all three align, a violation feels like a threat to the whole structure. So here's the question worth asking before you act on the heat. Is the moral integrated heat, meaning something actually violated consent, integrity, or the responsible use of power? Or is this the ego integrated heat, meaning something made me look foolish, less powerful, or misunderstood? Both feel urgent. They require different responses. Moral integrated heat calls for grounded action. Ego integrated heat calls for a pause and a reality check. You are the author of the code. The code is not the core of you. That's what keeps strong characters from turning into rigid identity defense. And that distinction between the constitution you've authored and the person doing the authoring is what makes it possible to hold ethics firmly without becoming brittle. That's not academic. That's emotional regulation and moral clarity working together in real time. I want to be honest about a question that surfaced during this whole examination, because I think a lot of people are asking it quietly and not saying it aloud. When I looked at the morals and ethics I had defined, I noticed something uncomfortable. The people I see with the most power and money very often are not operating from these frameworks. And the people I see operating from consent, integrity, and responsible use of power, often they're not wealthy. And I sat with that and I asked, are these poor people morals? Am I limiting my financial ceiling with an ethical framework? That's not a small question. I wasn't willing to dismiss it. So I examined it in the same way I examined everything else. There are three broad pathways to wealth: creating real value, extracting rent from systems, and exploiting asymmetry through coercion or deception. The third can generate rapid accumulation, but it carries instability, legal exposure, reputation fragility, and collapse risk. We just don't see that part as often because the collapse isn't as visible as the rise. And here's the more important question I had to ask. Would abandoning my ethics actually make me feel powerful? Or would it fracture something I need intact to function? because power without internal coherence often produces paranoia, not peace. My morals don't prohibit building high-value services, negotiating hard, charging premium prices, competing aggressively but fairly, or scaling something real. They prohibit deception or selfish gain, coercion, and careless power use. Those are different things. The deeper danger isn't the ethical people stay poor. The deeper danger is internalizing the belief that integrity and financial abundance are mutually exclusive. That belief, if adopted, would have sabotaged me far more than my moral framework ever could. The real question isn't, should I drop my morals? It's, how do I build strategic power without violating them? And that is a much more interesting challenge, one worth staying in. Now, I want to talk about values because this is where everything comes together. And I need to start by saying something that surprised me when I first understood it clearly. And before I do, I want to be honest with you about something. In the values episode, I didn't fully name what I'm about to share. And that's been sitting with me. Not because everything I said was wrong, but because I left something important incomplete. Part of what this bonus episode is, here to do is correct that in real time. I'd rather pivot publicly than carry something forward that doesn't fully hold. That's not a failure of the work. That's the work. Showing up, finding the gap, and saying so out loud. You don't need to be perfect to be worth listening to. You need to be honest. So here it is. Not all values have the same relationship to your morals. Some of your values grow directly from your moral commitments. They're so tightly woven into what you refuse to violate that they feel like identity itself. And some of your values are completely independent of your morals. They're about what you're moving toward, not what you're protecting. Both are real, both matter, but they don't behave the same way, and that difference is everything. Morals are guardrails. They define what you refuse to violate. Ethics are behaviors. They define how you move. Values are drivers. They define what you're moving toward. Values come from lived experience, from contrast, from pain, from longing, from admiration. You don't value authenticity because a moral commanded you to. You value it because you've lived at the cost of its absence. You don't value your children's growth because a rule prescribed it. You value it because it lives in your body as something that matters more than almost everything else. Values answer a different question than morals do. Morals answer, what won't I violate? Values answer, what am I building toward? What matters enough that I protect it when something has to give? And here's the thing about values that most conversations miss. You can have values that are completely independent of your morals and ethics, things you care about and move toward that don't have a direct moral attachment. And you can have values that are so deeply woven into your moral framework that they feel like identity. Those two categories don't behave the same way. They don't carry the same weight. And knowing the difference is everything. This distinction between the two different hierarchies of values is what I kept feeling was missing from my earlier thinking, and it took a moment of real friction in my own life for it to fully land. The first step I call identity integrated values. These are values that have become so aligned with your morals and your ethics that they feel like who you are. They're not just things you care about. They're things you defend. When they're threatened, you get hot. You feel it in your body. You become protective. Here's what I mean by that. I deeply value authentic, practical, lived transformation, not polish, not academic framing, not institutional approval. Real tools for real people who are hurting and need traction. And when something shifts that value, when a tone becomes detached from lived experience, when something starts to feel theoretical instead of usable, I feel it immediately, and it comes out as heat. For a while, I thought that reaction was about sequencing or structure or someone not understanding my work. But when I slowed down and I actually looked at it, I found something more specific. That value, authenticity over abstraction, aligns directly with my moral of not distorting reality. And it aligns with my ethic of not overriding lived experience with theoretical framing. When a value, a moral, and an ethic all point at the same thing, that value becomes fortified. It becomes part of your character. It stops being a preference and becomes something you stand in. That's an identity-integrated value. And the heat you feel when it's threatened isn't dysfunction. It's information. It's your system saying, this is not negotiable. This is core. The second type I call directional values. These are things you genuinely care about and want to move toward, but they haven't fused with your moral guardrails yet. They guide you, they point you somewhere, but they don't define you in the same way. And when they slip, the feeling is different. You feel disappointed, maybe frustration, but not violation. Here's an example from my own life. I want to be healthier. I've been working on it, physical therapy, getting back to the habits, taking my medication consistently, and there have been seasons where it dropped down the priority list because other things were on fire. And when it slipped, I went down a familiar path. Maybe I don't actually value my health. Maybe that's why I'm not where I want to be with it. But that's not what's happening. And I want to name this clearly because a lot of people do this, and it costs them. Priority is not the same as value. Timing is not the same as value. Capacity is not the same as value. I can value my health deeply and still have it at position 4. I can value my health deeply and still have it at position 4 on my execution list during a season of high-load crisis management. When something has to give, when I'm in physical therapy and stabilizing medications and trying to hold the rest of my life together, the workout slips. That's not evidence that health isn't a value. That's evidence that something more urgent temporarily outranked it. And here's the important thing. I didn't have a strong moral attached to that value yet. There's no ethical line being crossed when I miss a week of workouts. So the feeling when it slips is disappointment, not the hot, protective intensity that comes when an identity-integrated value is threatened. That difference in feeling, that's the signal. That's how you know which category you're in. So when something makes you genuinely hot, when you feel that protective urgency, that sense of violation, slow down and investigate, because you're probably not just feeling a preference being disrupted. You're feeling an identity-integrated value defending itself. And underneath that value, if you look, you'll almost always find a moral and an ethic that align with it. There's the reason that values has weight. They're the reason that value has weight. So here's the architecture put together cleanly. Morals are the guardrails you refuse to violate. Ethics are the behaviors, how you actually move. Values are the drivers, what you're pointing your life toward. Some values grow directly from your morals, others are entirely independent, but they coexist. And when a value and a moral and an ethic all align, when they are all pointing at the same thing, something called integrity forms. The word literally means integrated. The parts line up, and when they line up, something in the body relaxes. Decisions get cleaner. Self-criticism loses its grip. You stop performing your character and start simply being it. But there's a catch, and I want to name it directly. Morals are not your identity, even when they feel like it. Even when a value becomes so fortified that it feels accidental. Morals are still behavioral guardrails, not the person underneath them. They can be examined, updated, refined. The person doing the examining doesn't disappear. I noticed this in myself during the friction I described earlier. The heat I felt wasn't really about structure or sequencing. It was this. If my work gets abstracted or misrepresented, people won't understand me. And if they don't understand me, my identity gets smeared. That's a fast nervous system cascade, and it's completely normal, but it's also worth seeing clearly. When identity is fused to output, when your sense of self depends on your work being seen exactly as you intend it, then every misread feels like annihilation. When identity is stable When identity is fused to output, when your sense of self depends on your work being seen exactly as you intend it, then every misread feels like annihilation. When identity is stable underneath output, friction just becomes calibration. And here's what I've come to understand. The people who consciously examine their morals, define their ethics, and surface their actual values, rather than performing inherited ones, often become more grounded, not less. Because when behavior is driven by chosen alignment instead of fear of punishment, something shifts. You stop needing external validation to feel solid. You stop needing the tribunal in your head to keep quiet. You just know what you're doing and why. That's not rebellion. That's not compliance. That's calibration. That's what sovereignty actually feels like, and it feels good. Here's what I want to leave you with. You're already operating from a moral constitution. You already have values that govern your trade-offs. You already have ethics, conscious or not, that shape how you show up when power is present. The only question is whether you wrote it, or whether you inherited it without reading it. What I did in this process wasn't start from scratch. I examined what was already there. I pressure tested it. I attached specific behaviors to each moral so I couldn't drift or get distorted. I kept what survived scrutiny and rebuilt what didn't. And I came out on the other side with a framework I can actually stand in, not because it's perfect, but because it's mine. If you want to begin this for yourself, start with the 4 questions. When you feel moral outrage, what rule do you believe was broken? When you feel guilt, what rule do you believe you violated? When you feel superiority, what rule do you think you follow better? When you feel shame, what rule do you believe you failed? Don't judge what surfaces, just observe it. Then ask, where did that rule come from? Who benefited from me holding it? Does it still serve the adult I am today? Now, then once you've defined a moral, attach the ethics. What does this moral look like in behavior? What does it look like when it's functioning well? What does it look like when it's being violated? Those behavioral specifics are what kept the moral from becoming a vague slogan that can be twisted over time. And then pay attention to what makes you hot, because in those moments, in the friction, in the protectiveness, in the urgency, you're getting a direct signal about which values have become integrated with your moral framework. Those are the ones that define your character. Those are the ones worth naming explicitly, because once you name them, you stop being run by them unconsciously and start standing in them on purpose. The strange and beautiful thing about humans is that we can inherit a map and still redraw it. Most species don't get that option. You do. I'm going to pause here and let this land. If something in this resonated, you don't need to do anything with it. Just sit with it and notice what continues to unfold. Thank you for listening and for being here with me.